It's my first adaptation. I've never done a book before. The book was sent to me in 1995, and I was so struck by it. It was just such a like a beautifully written story, and with such incredible emotional impact. Like I was really just kind of devastated when I read the story of it, and it was just kind of moving in a very kind of profound way. And I thought that if I ever do make a book into a movie, that it would be Mr. Skin.
Partly the difficulties of this type of
Yeah, I mean,
material.
originally I read the book, I really loved it. I thought, it really moved me, but I just really felt like it was one of those books that was impossible to adapt,
Yeah,
because of, you know, what I loved about it was what made it impossible to adapt was that it just goes to these places that you just have never even really imagined.
yeah,
Like there's scenes in the film and in the book that I just have never even, it happens all the time, but you never even really think about it. And it just really opened my eyes in a way to this whole other world, that is, out there. But at the same time, I had never worked with like children so young. I've never, the youngest actor, and nowhere I had some actors who were like 13, 14 maybe.
yeah,
But in this story, the boys are 8 years old when the story begins, and um, it wasn't until I really figured out a way to shoot the more difficult material with the young actors that then I suddenly thought, oh well, maybe this film is doable. Like there is a way to shoot these scenes where you can use subjective camera and use point of view and editing, so that the kid actors themselves don't really have to know like what the story's about or what the context of what they're doing is, and that way, I didn't. That way, you don't have to traumatize the children
yeah,
who
yeah,
are in the
yeah,
movie in order to tell this story of trauma. So
yeah,
it wasn't until I really figured that out. I figured out a strategy I mean, I always very carefully kind of storyboard my movies and I edit my own movies, so I knew exactly how I was going to be able to shoot this stuff.
yeah.
It wasn't until I figured that out, then I thought, oh, well, maybe I can adapt the book, and then, from there it was actually relatively. And once I figured that out, it didn't take that much longer for me to adapt it and then make the movie. It was a struggle in terms of. I mean, the movie. I don't know if they I mean, I don't know if they necessarily helped us, and I mean, to me, they almost might have hurt us in a sense, because because Mysterious Skin is I think so different from those movies, because those movies are more about the adults,
Yeah,
and this movie is really about the kids, and it's all from their point of view,
yeah,
and it very much puts you in their position, and you sort of experience this kind of emotional journey subjectively with them.
yeah,
So I think that, and so Mr. Skin is a challenging film or a challenging story. So you know financing a film like that and putting a film like that together is always going to be difficult.
yeah,
And I mean, I think that it was made. Mystery Skin was made exactly as it should have been made. Which is as a sort of very uncompromising, independent movie in the truest sense of independent cinema, as opposed to if Mystery Skin was made in a larger way, with a
yeah,
much with on a like small studio scale, it would have had to been so watered down, so diluted that it really would, to me, not as a director, have been worth making. Like what's so extraordinary about Mysterious Skin is the places that it goes that are have never been seen before. Not necessarily, because it's not like there was a real consistency, I think, to the level of performance and the way we approached the movie. Every The making of the movie was actually very, it was difficult
yeah,
because we were working with a limited budget and had a tight schedule, and we had the kids, and it was just like logistically there were a lot of things to deal with. The period piece set in Kansas. There were so many things so many factors that made the shoot challenging, but at the same time, we were so blessed that the crew, the cast, everybody was so dedicated to the project and really had such a investment in it, that that the experience of making it was everyone took it so seriously and really worked so hard. So it's not like the tone on the set was always very all about the work, and always very very determined to make the movie as great as it possibly could be. So
Right.
well, Brady and Joe both came in and auditioned for the parts, and were really we saw dozens and dozens of actors. I mean, there were so many. The casting process was quite lengthy and involved, and they won the parts really fair and square. They're both as actors, particularly for actors who are so young, extremely dedicated, so well trained. They really are so resourceful, and they have the raw talent, but also they take their work so seriously, and they both of them really did a lot of research and really came to set so prepared that obviously the movie is really kind of about the two of them, so it was really resting on their shoulders. They took the movie really seriously when we were making it. I'd never worked with actors so young before, and as I said, it was a concern of mine that I didn't want the kids to be traumatized. So the kids actually did not know. Their parents obviously had read the script and knew what the film was about, and we had long discussions with the parents about how stuff would be shot and how the children would be protected from the subject matter. And so the kids themselves really just, I'd never worked with kids that young, and I asked for some advice from other directors, and they were talking about how children that young don't really act act whole performances. I mean, they're not really interested in their character's motivation and psychology and what their history is, and they really just act moment to moment, line to line. Everything is very specific and very broken down. So, which actually worked perfectly for what we were doing, because the kids didn't know the context of the larger context of what the script was about. And I always find it amazing when I watch the movie, because both George and Chase, the two younger versions of Brian and Neil, they have such incredibly emotional faces, and they're so natural, and there's so much going on in their performances when I know, as the director who made the movie, that they don't even know what they're reacting to. They don't even know what the context is. Yeah. And I just find it really so amazing that their performances, are so so rich and so emotional. Certain scenes are always harder to shoot than other scenes. That scene was difficult because of the intensity of it, and also it was also a very intricate scene. Had a lot of setups, a lot of different shots, a lot of different action to work out, and so technically it was a difficult scene. I mean, it's in a way really exciting scene, a really kind of rewarding scene as a director to shoot, because there's so much stuff going on, so much action, so much drama, and so much a lot of filmmaking to be done in that scene. So as a filmmaker, those scenes really interest me, but it was not easy to shoot. I'm always fascinated, though, that the most surprising thing about this movie has been, that Mr. Skin has these kind of very intense, very disturbing kind of scenes in them, but that the way the film works, because it has this sort of very sort of beautiful and kind of dreamy aesthetic, and the characters of Brian and Neil, I think, are so emotionally sort of involving that the audiences don't. The audiences are really sort of sucked into the story of the movie, and it's been surprising to me. I've had several sort of like, older women, like grandmothers and stuff, coming up to me saying, "Oh, how much they love the movie and how emotional it was for them and how it really affected them," and it was, it surprised me in the way that the film has really appealed to this very this very broad audience that I would think would be very sort of put off by the more disturbing scenes in the movie, the scenes of Neil when he's hustling, and there's so many scenes in the movie that I would think that I couldn't imagine a 65-year-old woman watching and feel and sort of going with. But the film is very sort of weirdly watchable. Like it's a really strange movie in the sense that it's dark, and it's about a dark and disturbing subject, but there's something very unique about it, that it's something that really kind of sucks you into it, and you're very kind of open to it. My experience in the past with sort of dark and disturbing movies like Irreversible or Kids is that you're very kind of distanced from them, and they're like almost painful to sit through. Like I remember when I saw Irreversible, I was like under my chair for half of the movie. And this movie is the way it functions as a piece of cinema is completely different, because it's so the style of it is so sort of inviting that it just sort of really, you're sort of drawn into it, and it really sort of works for this audience that I was not expecting it to work for. I think it's also the fact that and Brady was talking about this in an earlier interview today, is that in everything in the movie, the more intense things, the darker material, the tougher scenes in the movie are all so essential and integrated in the character's evolution. You know what I mean? Like all of those scenes are so important to what the film is about. Like there's nothing gratuitous about them at all. Like there's never the sense that there's anything sort of there for exploitative shock value, or just just randomly there. Like everything this is a testament to Scott in the book, in that everything is so integral, and that's why I felt like that if I couldn't make the film in a very uncompromising way, and in a way where you don't have to like sort of dilute the more difficult elements of the story, because the difficult elements were really what make the story unique. The aesthetic of the film, I really, I sat down with the DP before we started, and I said, I just want Mysterious Skin to be the most beautiful movie that you've ever seen. And the DP, Steve Gaynor, who shot Bully, was so excited to hear that, because he's all, when I sat down with Larry to shoot Bully, he said, I want Bully to be the ugliest movie ever made. So, and DPs, of course, love beauty, and they love to make beautiful images. So, that aesthetic really came from the book, because the book is, it tells this dark story, but in the most beautiful kind of poetic language. And so what I wanted to do in the film was cinematically translate the beauty of the book into cinematic beauty. So I always had this aesthetic in mind for film that was based on like this very specific design of color, lighting, texture, and that it was not. I didn't want to make the film a like handheld pseudo documentary DV kind of gritty movie. I wanted it to be this really elegant, composed, very sort of gorgeous aesthetic experience, so that there was a lushness to it that that sort of it it's not like it softens the hard edges of the story, but like I said, it sort of lulls you almost. You know, yeah, I've seen the movie obviously like 1,000 times by now, but it's like I always get sort of taken away by the movie, and I find it such a pleasurable experience to watch it. Like the scene of the drive-in and um, when the two kids are at the drive-in and there's the music and just everything about that scene just is so hypnotic, and it just kind of really sort of like just like takes you away into the world of the movie. And that's really what how I wanted the movie to work. You know, I wanted to have this aesthetic that was very kind of you know, visually kind of so lush and so kind of appealing. I think that, yeah, I mean, cinema is really, well, just because cinema is so much like dreams anyway, you know, and so much like, and dreams are related to memory. And that, I mean, in the film, it's sort of a stylistic strategy in the sense that the first act or the first reel of the film is when the kids are younger, when they're 8, is much more sort of fragmented and almost impressionistic in the way that the memories of the kids, you know, because they're 10 years earlier, 10 years older in terms of the memory, is like it's more hazy, and there's more sort of blackouts and more sort of there's more of a kind of like almost like a vagueness to those images, like they're like these impressions, you know. And they're like one of the scenes that I really love is I love the scene of the little boy watching the spaceship, because people are all, is that spaceship supposed to be real? And to me it's sort of like such a great symbol of, because the spaceship is such a sort of the way an 8-year-old boy would imagine what a flying saucer looks like. It's such a sort of cliche, you know, 50s cliche of a flying saucer, that it's really becomes this huge symbol of this thing that takes over his whole life. Like when he's standing up on the roof and this sort of monumental UFO kind of just overtakes the whole frame, in the way that his life has been sort of overtaken by this trauma that's happened to him, and that he's sort of blacked out, you know, that he's sort of not remembering. I don't know if it wasn't really, it wasn't hard for us. It was like there was a lot of the book is very specific in that sort of like lower class suburban kind of world of you know, where the milieu of these boys and where they grew up. And that was really kind of that really keyed me into the whole story, because I grew up in, you know, suburban California, which is not Kansas, but there's so much sort of universal about that story about growing up. Even though what happens in the book didn't happen to me, I really felt this affinity with that childhood, because that childhood was so much my childhood. And so there was and so in the sort of production design of the movie, the creation or the recreation of that world was very I guess I didn't really approach it from like other films had been there sort of point of view, as much as like this is what my life was like, you know. And it's like the people, like, you know, that were working on the movie, the art department stuff, would go, oh, that's the wallpaper I had, you know what I mean, or I played with that toy when I was a kid. And it was very sort of like it became this very sort of like personal creation of this, like this world that you know, everybody grew up in. That's the way the book works, I think, is it really sort of draws on, you know, it gets you to remember your own childhood, and like this, and that's why I think the story is so. That's what the sort of secret, I think, of its impact is, that Scott has very cleverly integrated all of these sort of the iconography of childhood, and all of these little, like that little cereal pack, and the thing, everything about the story is, there's all these specific details in the story that you relate to so much, that it's really, you're re-experiencing your own childhood, only in this childhood, there's these terrible things that happen. So it
Yeah,
makes
yeah.
it really, you relate so strongly to the characters and the way they're growing up
Right,
that
right.
you're sort of growing up with them. I've never had a movie before that has had such a expansive sort of span of time.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
like the fact that the movie begins in 1981 and ends in 1991,
Yeah.
and you go through so much with these characters, and I think that's for me why the ending of the film is so kind of emotional and so like profoundly kind of moving because you know so much about these characters and you've experienced so much with them, and I see the story as these two sort of lost souls, and they finally come together, and the last scene of the movie is so it's so emotional in the way that there's a hope there,
Yeah.
but it's not. There's also an uncertainty, and it's
Yeah.
not this sort of cheesy kind of Hollywood happy ending, but it's not just total like gloom and doom and everything is terrible.
Yeah.
That there's really the sense that these kids have really been through something and really been traumatized and really are trying to deal with the aftermath of what's happened to them, and
Yeah.
that the audience has been through everything with them.